Meet Chris, a talented African-American photographer, and his white girlfriend Rose, a perfect match in every way except for the one thing that society couldn't seem to ignore: the color of their skin. But despite these societal barriers, Chris and Rose love each other deeply and want to get married one day. Rose invites Chris to spend a fun-filled weekend with her family. Chris is a bit nervous, unsure of how her family will react to their relationship. Despite Rose's assurances that her parents are open-minded and not racist, Chris remains uneasy during their drive. Chris calls up his best friend Rod, who works as an airport security officer, to thank him for taking care of his dog while he's away on this trip. Then, with everything sorted, Chris and Rose set off to meet her family. Upon arrival, it's evident that Rose's parents are pretty wealthy. Her dad, Dean, is a famous neurosurgeon, and her mom, Missy, is a successful psychiatrist. Dean takes Chris on a tour of their luxurious house, and Chris feels a bit uneasy when he notices that the people working as house help are black. Sensing Chris's discomfort, Dean shares a heartfelt story, explaining that the housekeeper and groundskeeper were once his parents' trusted caretakers. After they died, he couldn't bear to part ways with them, so he kept them close. Afterward, the four gather on the porch for a friendly chat. During the conversation, Rose's parents announce that they are holding a house party the following day. The conversation takes a sentimental turn when Chris shares the tragic story of his mother's death in a car accident when he was just a child. Since the topic seems sensitive, Rose's parents quickly shift the conversation to something lighter. They notice that Chris appears to be a smoker based on his behavior, so Missy suggests hypnosis therapy to help him quit. She explains that it helps people stop smoking quickly. Georgina, the housekeeper, serves them tea. However, it seems like something isn't quite right with her. Her expressions appear to be a strange mix of happiness and stress. Upon noticing this, Missy rudely tells Georgina to leave them alone. Before Chris gets a chance to react, he is interrupted by Jeremy, Rose's younger brother. During dinner, the atmosphere takes an unexpected turn as Jeremy starts questioning Chris about his fighting abilities and brings up the controversial idea that black people are genetically stronger than white people. The situation gets even stranger when Jeremy stands up from his seat and is about to challenge Chris to a fight. Thankfully, Rose's parents intervene before things can escalate further. Later, when the couple finds some privacy in Rose's room, she angrily vents about her family's bizarre and racist behavior throughout the day. That night, Chris finds himself unable to sleep, so he steps outside for a smoke to calm his nerves. However, he's in for another unexpected and eerie encounter. Within moments, Chris sees Walter, the groundskeeper, running directly toward him at full speed. The tension rises, but the man runs past him without any further interaction. When Chris turns around, he notices Georgina standing at the window, checking her reflection and seemingly unaware of his presence. Puzzled by the strange events, Chris returns inside and sees Missy sitting in her therapy room, sipping tea. Curious and seeking some solace, Chris decides to join her. Seeing the opportunity, Missy asks about his smoking habit and wonders if he'd like to try her hypnosis therapy. Before Chris can respond, she begins stirring her tea, and the scraping sound strangely affects him in the dimly lit room. Missy continues her conversation with Chris, asking deeply personal questions about the time his mother died. Chris hesitates to answer, but the hypnotic sound of the spoon scraping against the teacup somehow compels him to speak. As Missy keeps probing, Chris's painful memories resurface, and he begins to cry, eventually feeling completely paralyzed. Then, with a single command, sink, Missy sends Chris into a terrifying state of helplessness. He feels as though he is sinking deeper and deeper into his own mind. Desperately reaching out, he finds himself unable to escape. Finally, she reveals that this unsettling realm is known as the sunken place. The next moment, Chris suddenly wakes up in Rose's bed. He receives a text from his best friend Rod and dismisses the previous night's events as nothing more than a terrible nightmare. Eager to shake off the strange experience, Chris heads outside with his camera to capture the beauty of his surroundings. He approaches Walter, the groundskeeper, hoping to strike up a friendly conversation. But Chris quickly realizes that something is off about Walter as well. His eyes seem distant, and his manner of speaking is reminiscent of an older white American man. However, when Walter mentions Chris's smoking habit and asks whether Missy's therapy worked, Chris is shocked to realize that the eerie hypnosis session wasn't just a nightmare. Disturbed by the discovery, Chris immediately shares the experience with Rose, who apologizes for her mother's actions. Surprisingly, Chris finds that the hypnosis has indeed cured his desire to smoke. Later, dozens of wealthy white people arrive for the Armitage's annual gathering. Most of the guests are older white people who begin acting strangely at the sight of Chris. As Chris and Rose continue to mingle with the guests, they encounter a woman who crudely asks Rose if Chris is better in bed because he's black. Another elderly couple comments on how black skin is now fashionable. leaving Chris feeling disgusted and eager to escape the conversation. He looks around for a nice view to photograph with his camera. While exploring, Chris comes across another black man named Logan King. However, just like Walter, Logan speaks and behaves like an older white person. As the party continues, Chris meets Jim Hudson, a well-known blind art curator who lost his sight due to a genetic disease. Unlike the other guests, Jim does not bring up Chris's race during their conversation. Instead, he reveals himself to be a fan of Chris's work and praises his talent for photography. Feeling uneasy, Chris heads upstairs, unaware that the party guests have suddenly fallen silent. Upon entering his room, he is puzzled to find his phone charger unplugged, which makes him suspicious. He checks the other rooms and eventually concludes that it must have been Georgina who unplugged his phone. Seeking some comfort, Chris calls his best friend Rod to catch up and shares the bizarre hypnosis experience with him. Rod expresses concern and jokingly suggests that white people enjoy turning black people into sex slaves. However, Chris reassures him that everything is fine. Chris also notices that Georgina speaks like an older white person and struggles to understand modern slang. He then confesses to her that being surrounded by so many white people intimidates him. Upon hearing this, Georgina seems like she wants to say something but hesitates. Instead, she begins to cry. She insists that the Armitages treat her like family before walking away in a strange manner. When Chris returns downstairs, he finds Dean engaged in conversation with a group of older guests. Chris seizes the opportunity to involve Logan in the discussion, secretly taking out his phone to snap a picture of him for Rod, as he believes he has seen Logan before. However, Chris forgets to turn off the flash. As the camera captures the image, Logan suddenly experiences a nosebleed. He becomes hysterical, lunges at Chris, and frantically shouts, "Get out!" To lighten the mood, Dean proposes a game for the guests. However, Rose notices that Chris looks unhappy and suggests that they take a walk together. In their absence, the family and guests begin a disturbing auction, with Chris as the prize. The blind Jim Hudson ultimately places the highest bid. Meanwhile, in the woods, Chris confesses that he's been experiencing strange sensations ever since the hypnosis session and wants to return home. Alone in the room, Chris sends the picture of Logan to Rod. It turns out that Rod knows the man as Andre Hayworth, who used to date one of their friends. Rod begins freaking out after Chris explains how the man has seemingly changed his name and is now in a relationship with a significantly older woman. However, Chris's phone battery dies before they can delve deeper into the mystery. Convinced that something is wrong, Chris tells Rose that they need to leave immediately. Rose agrees and goes downstairs to retrieve her bag. After she's gone, the sight of the open closet intrigues Chris, so he decides to take a look. Inside, he discovers various photographs of Rose in previous relationships with several black men, including Walter and Georgina. It becomes evident that Chris isn't the first black person Rose has been involved with. When Rose re-enters the room, claiming she's ready to go but can't find her car keys, Chris urges her to head downstairs. As they reach the bottom of the stairs, they find Jeremy blocking the front door, while Missy stands ominously in the foyer with her teacup. An uneasy atmosphere pervades the air. Chris pleads with Rose to find the keys while Dean enters the room and begins talking about the brilliance of the white mind and its need for a more suitable vessel. Creeped out, Chris loses patience and starts yelling for Rose to find the keys. As the unsettling truth comes to light, the family begins behaving strangely and slowly encircles him. Rose then reveals that she has been in on her family's plan all along. When Chris tries to attack Jeremy, Missy taps her teacup, sending him into a hypnotic trance. Rendered powerless, Chris watches helplessly as the family drags him into the basement. Back in the city, Rod's concern for his friend continues to grow. After multiple unanswered calls, he decides to investigate further. While searching for Andre online, Rod discovers a missing person article about him. Meanwhile, Chris finds himself bound to a chair, struggling in vain to break free. The TV in front of him suddenly turns on, playing a recording of Rose's grandfather, who explains how Chris was chosen because of his genetic advantages as a black man. As the unsettling message sinks in, a video of tea being stirred begins to play, sending Chris back into unconsciousness. The following day, Rod visits the police to report his suspicions that Chris is being held hostage by a white family that kidnaps black people and turns them into sex slaves. However, the police begin laughing at his seemingly outlandish theory. While this is happening, Chris learns the horrifying truth about Rose's family. He wakes up again and finds Jim Hudson on the TV, calmly explaining the surgical procedure. The Armitage family has been transplanting the consciousness of elderly white people into the bodies of young black people, granting them preferred physical traits in a twisted form of immortality. In Jim's case, however, what he wants most are Chris's eyes. Once the surgery is complete, Chris's consciousness will be reduced to a mere passenger in his own body, trapped forever in the sunken place. After the video ends, Chris finds a way to fight back. Right before the recording starts playing again, he cleverly blocks the hypnosis trigger by plugging his ears with cotton stuffing pulled from the chair's armrests. When Jeremy comes to retrieve him for the brain transplant procedure, Chris seizes his opportunity and strikes him with a lacrosse ball. With his captor momentarily incapacitated, Chris gets another idea from the mounted deer on the wall. When Jeremy fails to return for some time, Dean goes out to investigate. This is when Chris ambushes him and drives the deer's antlers into him, causing him to bleed to death. A knocked-over candle sets the operating room on fire, trapping Jim Hudson inside. Chris then heads upstairs and comes face-to-face with Missy. He quickly knocks the teacup off the table, preventing her from using it as a hypnotic trigger. However, she retaliates by stabbing his palm with a sharp object. As the two struggle against each other, Chris manages to overpower her and stab her in the eye. As he reaches the front door, he is suddenly caught in a headlock by a bloodied Jeremy. Thinking quickly, Chris stabs him in the leg and then stomps on his skull to ensure he stays dead, unaware of the chaos unfolding below. Rose is upstairs listening to music and browsing photos of shirtless black men, preparing to find her next victim. Meanwhile, Chris locates the car keys and starts the engine, desperate to escape the nightmare he's been living through. However, as he speeds away, he inadvertently hits Georgina with the car. Haunted by memories of his mother's tragic hit-and-run death, Chris feels compelled to help Georgina despite the danger he is still in. He takes her into the car with him, but unfortunately Rose hears the crash and rushes outside with a rifle. In the process, she inadvertently reveals that Georgina and Walter are actually her grandparents, whose brains had been transplanted into younger black bodies. Georgina attacks Chris in a fit of rage. The ensuing struggle results in a car crash that kills her, but Chris manages to survive, injured and disoriented. Chris does his best to escape. Walter, under the control of Rose's grandfather, charges at him and tackles him to the ground in a desperate attempt to save himself. Chris uses his camera's flash to awaken the real person inside Walter's body momentarily, and luckily, he gains an unexpected ally. Walter takes the rifle from Rose and shoots her in the stomach before turning the gun on himself, bringing an end to the family's horrifying experiments. Injured and exhausted, Chris has no heart to kill Rose despite the horror she has put him through. Just at that moment, the police arrive. But luckily, it is an airport security vehicle belonging to none other than his best friend Rod. His timely arrival saves Chris from further harm, and the two drive away from the nightmare scene, leaving Rose to die in the middle of the street. Even though Chris escapes, the scars of what he endured will remain with him forever. The film leaves us with a chilling reminder of how evil can hide behind friendly smiles, making Get Out one of the most unforgettable psychological horror movies ever made. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next recap.